Hi, and welcome to the Digital Jobsite, where the boards are straight, the weather's great, and there really is a board stretcher. This is the video segment of a blog post entitled A Carpenter's Introduction to 3D Modeling that's hosted at the Digital Jobsite blog at finehomebuilding.com. And with this video, I want to take a walk through what might be a person's first exposure to 3D modeling, and to work through some of the things that happen in with early attempts or early exposure to the 3D modeling world. And if you've downloaded SketchUp to your computer and you've opened the program, this is SketchUp version 8, which is the version you would get today if you went out and downloaded the program. You open the program, and the screen you would see is very similar to this. This view is the default drawing mode, and if it's your first exposure or very early exposure, this screen might be unfamiliar. And so rather than build a model ahead of time or make any steps, I thought I'd just start from this very beginning stage like a person might do. And in the real world, a carpenter ends up on a job site, and one of the first things I remember having to do was to build a simple set of sawhorses. So I thought maybe I'd take that approach to this. You've shown up on a digital job site in this 3D modeling world. You're looking at this screen with colors and lines and not quite sure what you're exposed to. So I'm going to start off and just see how this goes. If I was going to build a set of sawhorses in the real world, there's a very simple set that can be built with four 2x4s 12 feet long. They're cut and assembled into a set of sawhorses. So if I wanted to build those sawhorses, I might be thinking, okay, I need a 2x4 to build with. So 2x4s are square. Here's a little square. Let's just see what this does. Let's just try to draw a 2x4. So I draw a square, and how do I make that 1.5 by 3.5? And I've drawn this rectangle. I don't know what it's doing or why, but I notice in this box down here in the lower right hand corner there's huge numbers, 119 11/64, comma 119 11/64, and I would like to have a 2x4 that's 3.5 inches by 1.5 inches on the end. So I'm just going to you can enter values in this box, not by clicking on it or anything, but just by typing it out on your number pad. And so I'm just going to type in a 3 spacebar 1/2, comma 1 space 1/2, enter. And all of a sudden I've got this little speck on my screen. I don't quite understand how that happened. To explain that, I'm going to cheat and then back up. If I use a certain tool, I can zoom in and I see my little box, and if I measure it, I can see that down in the box there's the 3.5 inches and there's the 1.5 inches. I press the escape key, and then if I zoom way back out, there's the little speck. So what happened is, when I opened this SketchUp program, it drew a rectangle on the ground, and the scale that we're looking at here, it turns out, is huge. So that when we zoom in for this little box, or when we create a little box and tell it what size, it was thinking we wanted a box of hundreds of inches square, when in fact we just wanted a very small box. And so if we back up by using this backer up here, it's a very handy key, we'll eliminate that box and start again. So if we start in this corner and we draw a box, it looks like it's about 2x4 size, but in reality, if looking down in the box in the corner, that's 76 and 9/16 by 51. So when the program opens up, it doesn't really know what size of a thing you're going to draw. You could be drawing a parking lot or a skyscraper or the end of a 2x4, and it doesn't really know. So let's just go back through the steps, and I'll tell you here that you don't have to type in the slashes and everything. You can type in decimal inches and it'll convert them to fractional inches. So I'm just going to type in 3.5 comma 1.5, enter, and it's now created our little rectangular 2x4 down here in the corner of the drawing axes. And so now if I take this little magnifying glass tool, which is called Zoom Extents, if I click on that, it fills the screen with what I'm drawing. It instantly makes the view relevant to the size of an object I'm building. And so here's our 2x4 box, and it's just laying there flat on the ground, 1.5 by 3.5 inches. If I right click on this, I get a nice handy little drop down dialog box, and if I click Entity Info, it's going to tell me about this box I'm looking at. It'll tell me about the line of it. It's 3.5 inches long. It's 1.5 inches the other dimension, and handily it's 5.25 inches square. So this Entity Info dialog box can easily tell us what we're looking at. By clicking on the header of this little box, it'll go away, so it's not clogging up my screen, but I can get it back by just clicking on that header bar. So I'm using the scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom in and out, and if I push down the scroll wheel and move the mouse around, then I get an orbit feature, so I can look at this box from different angles and dimensions and start to understand what it's like. When we first opened the screen, we noticed this kind of blue sky and a horizon. That's exactly what SketchUp is trying to show us. This area here is the ground, this is the sky, and the green line heads off into the distance on the horizon. That's the green axis. It's kind of the front to back dimension. This red line heads off to the far distant horizon on the right. It's the right and left axis, and then the blue line is the up and down. The vertical axis goes up into the sky and disappears. So we've just got this little rectangular box, 2x4 size, laying on the ground. And the next thing I want to do with that box is turn it into a 2x4. So I'm going to grab this little tool, which is my favorite tool. It's the board stretcher that I refer to on the Digital Jobsite. So if I take this little tool, just by clicking on it, when I hover over a rectangle, I can get this fuzzy little dot pattern, and then if I just take the mouse, click down with the left button and pull, it's making that into a 2x4. And for this set of horses, I want that 2x4 to be 48 inches long. So I'm just going to type 48, enter, and take the little zoom out key, and boom, there's a 2x4 standing up on the ground, balancing nicely there. And I want to, rather than have the 2x4 standing up, I want to lay it down. And to do that, there's a rotate tool up here. If I hit the space bar, it always goes back to the select tool from whatever mode I was in. So I got out of the push-pull tool or the board stretcher, and I want to go to the rotate tool. So I grab this rotate tool, and I think I want to make this 2x4 lay down on the ground. And so this protractor is just zinging or the move tool's moving all over the place. And I think I just want to lay that board down on the ground. So I click the board, and it's doing all these wacky things, not laying the 2x4 down on the ground. So I'm going to click the back arrow here and explain the difference. This 2x4, I'll triple click the 2x4, and it selects all the edges and faces involved in the 2x4. And if I go up into the entity info box, it's telling me that there's 18 entities. That's all the lines and faces that comprise that 2x4. If I select one face, it's square inches. If I double click a face, it's telling me there's 5 entities, and that's the face and then the 4 edges. And when I select anything, a line or a face or a surface, and then select a tool, it's going to operate on that, only what's selected. And in this case, I had selected the face and rotated it, and it comes out with this ridiculous looking geometry here. And that's what happens if you grab that face alone and turn it, which isn't what we want to do. So a concept that we're going to approach here early on is the grouping concept. So I can, if I want to rotate this 2x4, I can triple click it and rotate it, and it rotates the whole 2x4, pivoting it on the green axis. If I use the back arrow and make our little rotate tool turn red, it's now going to rotate everything that's selected on the red axis. And then if I it's still I've collected all these individual lines and faces and rotated them. If I hit the space bar and then click out in space, it deselects everything I had. And now if I take this face on the end and rotate it, it does all these wacky things again because I didn't reselect everything and then rotate it. So I'm just going to use the back arrow key again here to get back and stand our 2x4 up, and I'll show you that rather than triple clicking and selecting all these pieces each time I want to do something with the whole group, the whole group of things, I can take my cursor tool there. It's just an arrow. I'm holding the left mouse button down. I'm dragging from top left to lower right, which selects everything on the screen. And now I'm going to do a very quick function here and right click on the selected geometry, and I get a drop down box, and I'm going to select make group out of these things. So now what happens is if I click on this, I'll click out in space to deselect it. If I click on it, I don't get an individual line or face. I get the whole thing, the whole 2x4. So if I grab the rotate tool and rotate it a couple times, let's see, I'll get it to go on the end. I can rotate it. It's doing all these things. It's doing everything to the whole 2x4 and not just individual parts of it because it's a group. So once I've done that, if I want to use the push-pull tool and go in here and I want to make this 2x4 longer, nothing happens. I'm using the tool just like I did before. Nothing's happening. The reason is because the software has combined all those elements into a group. If I want to edit those, I need to double click the group with the left mouse button, and now I'm in group edit mode, and I can grab this board stretcher tool and I can make the 2x4 longer, I can make it shorter, I can make it thicker, I can make it wider. All these things in the group edit mode. So group edit mode is handy because it combines all geometry so that you don't have to select everything every time. But if you want to change that geometry, you need to double click with the left mouse button to get into group edit mode and manipulate the geometry from there. So I'm just going to use the back arrow key here again and put our 2x4 in its orientation standing up. And then I'm going to choose the rotate tool, and I'm just using my scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom in and out here so that I can zoom in down to the corner of this 2x4. Now I'm going to hold the scroll wheel down and orbit around so that I can index this rotate tool on a precise point, which is this bottom corner where it's sitting on the ground, and I want to pivot it in the right axis direction, which is red. So I'm going to get right on that corner point, click. Once with the mouse, I'm going to drag up in the vertical direction, or the blue axis. It's telling me on edge in the group. I'm going to click again and then spin this down, and it'll click onto the green axis. So if we use our zoom extents tool, orbit tool, and then if I'm holding the mouse wheel down, orbiting, I can roll the mouse wheel at the same time, and I can orbit and zoom at the same time to get a look at this 2x4 from the angle I want to look at it. And you'll notice in the rotate process, when we laid this 2x4 down, this corner has moved off the point of origin. Now that's not really that important, but early on it might be helpful to keep things oriented right on these axes. Later on it won't matter so much. So I'm going to grab the move tool, I'm going to hit the space bar to get me back so I don't have any tool. I'm going to select this group, then I'm going to grab the move tool this time. We used the rotate tool last time, and I'm doing all this manipulating with the mouse, the scroll wheel, and that orbit and zoom, those things will become more comfortable to you as you manipulate around the space. But if I want to pan side to side, if I hold shift and depress the scroll wheel, then I get a panning function, which is very nice to have. Oops. And there is another thing that happens. I rolled the mouse wheel, and all of a sudden everything that I was working with disappeared. And it seems like, is it deleted? Where did that thing go? I don't know where it went. When you get lost like that, just go up here to this little magnifying glass, zoom extents, click that, and it'll bring everything you've drawn into a position that fills the screen from the angle you were looking at it from. So I'm now going to move this 2x4 just by clicking the corner. I've selected this. I have the move tool. I'm going to grab a corner and I'm going to move it, and it'll click to that point of origin. And so that's one 2x4 for this pair of sawhorses. And I want the sawhorse to be, let's say, 30 inches tall. And so, being as this 2x4 is laying on the ground, if I want to lift it up, I still have the move tool. I'm going to grab this corner and I'm going to move it, and the program doesn't really know where I want to move this, but I'm going to hold the up arrow key, and then it'll move that up and down regardless of where my mouse goes. So that's a pretty handy thing. And I want to raise this off the ground. It's sitting on the ground, and I want to move it up so the horses, these sawhorses, end up being 30 inches tall. Let's make them 32 inches tall. So I'll click 32, enter, and now the 2x4 disappeared again. Zoom extents shows us that 2x4. I'm going to scroll out here, and now I can see that 2x4 is hovering off the ground. But I moved it from the ground up 30 inches, so the bottom of that 2x4 is 32 inches off the ground. So I'm going to select it again, and it says, you can see in the little box there, it says on blue axis. And I don't have to get this to land exactly on 1.5 inches. If you look at the box in the lower corner of your screen, that's called the value control box, and it says the length that I've moved this. It's jumping all over the place. And I can sit here and diddle around with this and try to make it land on 1.5 inches. But it's an effort in futility for the most part. So while I'm in this process, I can just type in 1.5, and it's going to move that 2x4 from the position it was in the direction I'm moving it, which was the blue axis, because I was holding the down arrow key, and it's going to move it exactly 1.5 or 1.5 inches. Now I'm just going to put the cursor out here in space and hit the enter or the space bar, and that takes me out of the move tool mode. So the sawhorses are going to consist, you've seen these before because you're a carpenter. If you're a 3D modeler, maybe you haven't, but you're a carpenter, you've seen these sawhorses. They're made with 3 2x4s, 4 feet long on the top, connected together. So I'm going to select this, and this is one of the great features about the 3D modeling world. To get another one of these 2x4s, I don't have to start over with the box and stretch it out and rotate it and put it in position. I can just select this group and the move tool. I want to move another 2x4, and if I just move this, it moves that board. So I'm going to click the back arrow. I still have the move tool. Now I'm going to hit the control key and drag this 2x4 down. And because I didn't keep my mouse moving in the right direction, it quit moving it down. It just jumped out here into space. If we look at this zoom extents tool, it just moved it over some weird space. That's not where we want it. We wanted to move it directly down. So I hit the back arrow key and select the 2x4 again, grab the move tool. I'm going to move it in the blue axis, and because I didn't hit the control key, it moved the 2x4 I had. So I'm going to go back. Now I'm going to hit the control key, drag this down. It's in the blue direction, so I'm going to go 3.5 inches plus an inch and a half, 4.5, 5 inches, 5 inches, enter. So now those two 2x4s, hitting the space bar to get out of that, the two 2x4s, if we take this little tape measure tool and measure from one to the other, they're 3.5 inches apart. I'm just going to hit the escape key, the back key to get rid of the measurement. That's not what I wanted, so I'm going to hit that forward key again. Now I have two 2x4s that are spaced 3.5 inches apart. And I want to stand one on edge in between these, so I'm going to hit the space bar, select one of these 2x4s, and this time I'm going to hit the control key and move this up underneath this 2x4. But I want to rotate this 2x4 so it's going vertical, so I have it selected, the 2x4 on a rotate, grab the rotate tool, and I'm going to rotate it. And this rotate thing is going, it's showing green, so it's going to rotate the way I want. But if I click it here and rotate, it pivots it funny. Wherever I drop that rotate tool, that's where it's going to rotate it from. So I actually want to rotate it from the center, and you can see the rotate tool indexes with the little purple circle. It says midpoint in group. There's the middle on that side, here's the middle on this side, here's the middle on this side over here. It'll just snap to the midpoint. I want to rotate it from a midpoint on the end, so I let it index to that. I click on the point, click along the edge, and then rotate it up. And it handily rotates to 90 degrees, and if you look in the value control box in the lower right hand corner, you'll see 90 degrees. If you weren't able to get this to land where you want, you can just type in 90, enter, and it'll make it go 90 degrees. And you can see that it just rotated 90 degrees just like I told it. But I want this 2x4 to be centered on these flat ones and in between them. So now I'm going to grab the move tool and I'm going to pick it up on this top edge. And if I just grab this 2x4 and move it, I'm trying to get it to land where I want it in between there, and it's just not behaving, bouncing all over, doing all weird things. Hit the back arrow key. So in the 3D modeling world, it's important to pick things up and drop things and measure things from the point you want to. You can't just grab this 2x4 in the middle with your hand and make it line up. So in the 3D modeling world, I'm going to grab it on this top edge when it says midpoint in group, and then I'm going to slide it back and forth on this other 2x4 until it lands on a midpoint. I don't want it on the end. I don't want it out here in space. I want it to be lined up right in the middle and the end. So when I get it there, I let go of the mouse, hit the space bar, click out here in space, and now I have my three 2x4s all lined up and centered up on each other. And if I didn't goof something up along the process, I've made them 48 inches long, which is what I wanted. Alright, so that's the top beam of this set of sawhorses and the process for getting here. I'm going to stop this video here. It's getting kind of long, and I'll pick this up again and we'll put the legs and gussets underneath this beam to create our set of sawhorses. So come back for part 2 and we'll put some legs on there and show you some more things for your introductory lesson into 3D modeling for carpenters.